What would we do without coffee? For most of us, it's the only way to wake up in the morning. For many others, coffee is an unnecessary evil we never should have sipped. But this debate between coffee drinkers and the decaffeinated isn't new. In fact, it's been going on for over 1,000 years. The surprisingly controversial history of coffee. Up next on Fact Bites. And while we wait for this episode to finish brewing, take a moment, will you, to hit like, subscribe, and that bell for notifications. The debate around coffee starts all the way back at its origins. The most widely accepted version of the original coffee buzz starts in Ethiopia, around 850 AD. Legend has it that a goat herder named Kaldi noticed his goats acting very energetic after eating some red berries. Now, I know very little about goats, but I have a feeling that very energetic is a bit of an understatement. After witnessing the reaction of his goats, Kaldi decided to try those red berries for himself because that's the sort of guy he was. Those berries, of course, were coffee berries, full of coffee seeds or beans, and Kaldi noticed that after eating them, he too felt full of energy. Remembering my own first experience with coffee, I imagine Kaldi was feeling something between "my brain is on fire" and "I can see time." Kaldi was so energized he ran home to tell his wife, who told him the berries must be heaven sent, so he should go share the berries with the monks at the local monastery. Kaldi then ran, I'm assuming, since he was hopped up on caffeine, to the local monastery where the monks were, well, not as excited as he was. They sent Kaldi home and threw his find into the fire, calling it the devil's work. But the smell of the roasting coffee berries was so good that they walked that back immediately. The monks removed what was left of the berries from the fire and placed them into a jug of water, creating the first pot of coffee as we know it today. And since the concoction smelled so good, the monks all tried it and were able to stay awake all night through their evening vigil. The following day, they took a vow to consume coffee every day to stay awake during their daily prayers, proving that even the most committed of us have fallen asleep during a church service or two. That's the legend, but in actual fact, it's probable that people were consuming the coffee plant long before Kaldi's goats. Evidence suggests that humans would chew the coffee berries and seeds as a natural stimulant, and a common snack was ground coffee beans mixed with clarified butter or animal fat. Sorry to say, it seems your bullet coffee keto friends may be onto something. However, depending on who you ask, coffee actually comes from Yemen. There are two stories about who discovered it. It was either a Sufi mystic, Ghuthul Akbar Nuruddin Abu al-Hasan al-Shadili, or a Sheikh Omar discovered the coffee berries and its potent effects on their energy levels. I sincerely apologize for the way I pronounced those names. The Sufi mystic observed some energetic birds who were eating some red berries and, much like our friend Kaldi, decided to try those berries for himself. The birds weren't poisoned, so that was probably a sign that they were good to eat. Oddly enough, the mystic discovered this while walking through Ethiopia. Alternatively, the Sheikh Omar was wandering the wilderness in exile on the brink of starvation when he discovered the berries. He ate them, felt better, and then decided to try roasting and then boiling them. In possibly the first instance of a coffee house, the Sheikh shared his concoction with others, and his exile was lifted. What followed next was similar to the story in Ethiopia. Muslim Sufis would drink dark, bitter coffee to help them stay awake during nighttime devotions, and the practice spread from Yemen to Mecca and elsewhere in the Arabian Peninsula. Also, like the Ethiopian monks, some Orthodox imams in Mecca weren't thrilled with the new trend. They tried to have the drink banned in 1511, but the ban was overturned in 1524 under the reign of Ottoman Turkish Sultan Suleiman I, with the approval of Grand Mufti Mehmet Ebusud el-Imadi. Again, apologies on any pronunciation errors. Presumably, this was because they could no longer manage their 13-year-long caffeine headache. In fact, over the next several centuries, coffee was banned multiple times, bouncing wildly between nectar of the gods and beverage of Beelzebub. Though it had spread throughout Europe by the 1500s, many in the Catholic Church thought coffee was definitely evil and ought to be banned across Christendom. The prevailing logic was this: Jesus drank wine. Wine is clearly a blessed beverage. The Muslim world does not drink wine. The Muslim world does drink coffee. Therefore, coffee must be evil. This argument went all the way up to Pope Clement VIII, who was asked to denounce coffee before God and the world around the year 1600. Unfortunately for coffee detractors, somebody poured the Pope a cup of joe, and upon tasting it, he exclaimed, "Why, this Satan's drink is so delicious that it would be a pity to let the infidels have exclusive use of it." The Pope went on to bless the coffee beans and officially embrace coffee as a holy drink for good Catholics. Pope Clement's decisions were not all great. I mean, that infidels comment is a real yikes. But I think we can all agree that the coffee thing was the right call. Coffee continued to be a point of contention, moving from the spiritual to the political court of public opinion. As coffee consumption grew, so did coffee houses around the world. These were centers for philosophy, art, culture, and revolution, and with good reason. Throughout much of Europe, the primary means of hydration was not water, it was alcohol. Water supplies were iffy at best, deadly at worst, and alcohol was actually a safe alternative that was consumed in varying quantities morning, noon, and night. Once tea and coffee were introduced, they actually made the water much safer to drink. Not only did they require you to boil the water first, but the tannins in tea leaves and coffee beans actually kill bacteria. So as the popularity of tea and coffee grew, Europe went from a centuries-long bender to the most influential caffeine buzz of all time. By the 17th century, the working classes were hopped up on coffee and ready to start a fight, either figuratively or literally. Coffee houses were places where you could talk for hours about the news of the day, new inventions, and most importantly, new ideas, all for the price of a cup of coffee. In fact, coffee houses were known as penny universities and patrons as penny politicians because of the vast quantity of knowledge shared and publicized there. Oh, and yes, a cup of coffee only cost a penny, and in some places that bought you unlimited refills. Those were the days. But not everyone loved coffee. In 1674, a pamphlet titled The Women's Petition Against Coffee was released. Women were not allowed in coffee houses, so it's only natural that they'd be upset that their husbands were spending all day sipping coffee and debating with strangers and not at home attending to their wives. The pamphlet states, "The excessive use of that newfangled, abominable, heathenish liquor called coffee has so eunuch our husbands and crippled our more kind gallants that they are become as impotent as age and as unfruitful as those deserts whence that unhappy berry is said to be brought." Listen, I understand your problem with the coffee houses, but I feel like if someone had given these women a cup of coffee, they may have changed their minds on the drink itself. And these women weren't the only ones worried about coffee houses. The ideas exchanged in these places were not limited to one class. Both highborn and low were rubbing elbows with each other, a dangerous thing for monarchs during the Age of Enlightenment. So dangerous that both Charles II of England and Frederick the Great of Germany tried to ban coffee and shut down coffee houses, blaming its ill effects on health, the pub economy, and also their own security as kings. In 1794, Gustav III of Sweden even set up an experiment where he asked a pair of doctors to serve a condemned criminal 3 pots of coffee every day for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, the experiment is technically inconclusive since both the doctors and King Gustav all died before the prisoner, who lived well into his 80s. Actually, his exact age at the time of his death is unknown, since the experiment ended when the prisoner's twin brother died at 83. The twin was also a condemned criminal, but he was served 3 pots of tea every day as a control parameter in this very official scientific experiment. Some of the most influential thinkers, doers, and philosophers of the day were fueled by Java, and in turn fueled major change in the 1700s. Voltaire was said to drink between 40 and 50 cups a day. So the next time someone complains about your coffee addiction, just tell them you're working on the sequel to Candide. Ben Franklin also spent all day in coffee houses, stirring up trouble and rabble-rousers, and that was just when he was in London. Back in the American colonies, tea was still the most popular beverage of choice, and according to accounts, they were drinking 1.2 million pounds of the stuff every year. But that all changed at the Boston Tea Party. Tired of paying extra taxes on tea, and also on everything else, the colonists threw a British shipment of tea into the Boston harbor, and presumably made the world's largest cuppa. Though this act of protest was met with mixed reviews, it was also coupled with several boycotts of tea in the colonies, and coffee rose to prominence. In fact, it was considered your American duty to drink coffee every day, and that is presumably how we won a revolution. Over 2 centuries later, coffee is still a topic of much debate, this time around its health benefits. In the 80s and 90s, researchers concluded that drinking coffee could increase your risk of cardiovascular disease and cancer. However, the population they were studying was small and contained many people who had other contributing factors, like smoking. After expanding their research to include a wider population over a longer period of time, the evidence now suggests the exact opposite. People who drink coffee appear to be at a lower risk for not only heart attack and cancer, but also stroke, Alzheimer's, liver disease, type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's, and evidence suggests you'll live longer. So take that, you weirdo mushroom coffee drinkers. And most recently, the coffee debate centers around how coffee is cultivated. The coffee belt, where the plants grow best, covers South America, Africa, and South Asia. Not only is there a fight for fair trade coffee, where growers receive trade agreements that pay fair prices for their product, but there is also a push for organic and sustainable coffee agriculture. Since many coffee plantations are in areas with diminishing rainforests, sustainable practices in growing are important for the future of those ecosystems. So whether you drink your coffee black or pumpkin spiced, hot or blended with ice, you are sipping one of the most contentious beverages in history. The debate rages on, both culturally, physically, and agriculturally, but it doesn't look like we'll be cutting back on the 400 billion cups we drink globally every year. How do you take your coffee? Do you drink it at all? Tell us in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.